Welcome to A Matter of Perspective with Judge Derwin Webb. I am the Judge Derwin Webb, coming to you from the Fraser History Museum. I am honored to be on this show today with one of my best friends of all time, the Roman Oben. I don't know how to introduce you. Do I introduce you as NFL guy? Do I introduce you as Hall of Fame from University of Louisville? NFLPA? It's so many things, so many titles that you hold, man. Just welcome to the show, man. I appreciate you being here today.
Thank you. I'm a generalist is what they say now. That's the new thing. You got to be a generalist. You got to do a little bit of everything. So I'm your generalist.
Tell me, what exactly are you doing right now? I know what you're doing, but tell the listeners what you are actually doing right now.
I've been at the NFL league office for 6 years now, and my title, I'm a vice president in the football operations department, and I handle the strategy on how we grow football participation at the younger ages. I deal with messaging, college outreach, how we speak to the student athlete, how we educate the high school athlete, going into college on quite a few issues. I'm the point of contact with NCAA on certain things, American Football Coach Association, so a lot of football organizations, corporate partners, quite a few of them that have actually helped advance the cause. So obviously, primarily working for the NFL, the way we're structured, you work for ownership. So we drive league business, league priorities, and just make sure there's 32 versions of that makes sense for all the NFL teams.
Right.
Too. Definitely a complex environment, but I love what I do. I love the people that I serve, and you get to make a difference. And it's hard to find that balance between the corporate structure and you actually making a difference. And so I definitely love at least the scope of work that I work on.
Well, I know that things are different for you right now. Things are different for everyone. You're saying this is your 6th year doing this, but you've never done this during the middle of a pandemic. How has your job kind of changed since all these issues came up with the pandemic?
Yeah, well, I live in northern Jersey, so I typically would be commuting into Manhattan every day that I'm not traveling, and so I live near a train station in a town northern, like 17 or 15 miles west of Manhattan, and so I just actually started taking a train again like a week ago.
For those that don't know us, we pledge the greatest fraternity in the history of fraternities, Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated. You and I were fraternity brothers together at the university, but more than anything, we kind of hung out also outside of fraternity organization events, outside of athletics. But one thing that I can say about you, and I think that you and I were together on this, we wanted to be student athletes more than just athletes. So what made you want to be more of a student than just an athlete? Was it something that your mom brought you up, raised you up with, or what drove you academically more than just athletics? Because at the time, let's just be honest, we were anomalies, if you will. People were wondering why we wanted to spend so much time studying and things like that. What drove you?
Yeah, I think to the point of what I said earlier, I came to U of L from an area of the country where people went to Georgia. I knew about Georgetown. I'd been to games. I knew about the value of their degree and what Thompson had done for student athletes, and talked about Black graduation rates and all that stuff, and UVA folks. So I was around those types of people. So when I got to Louisville, and I just remember there were some guys that not so much didn't take school as seriously, but recruiting was about attention, and it wasn't about where do you want to get a degree and how do you prepare yourself for the rest of your life. It was about the NFL, and they just won the Fiesta Bowl the year before, and it was about a lot of excitement about Ted Washington, these guys, Carl Garner were going to the NFL, and that was the focus. I just always believed that you can do both, and that's why I pledged the fraternity. That's why I was involved in civic activity on campus, and a gentleman, and honestly, Derwin, I got to give you credit. I looked up to you a lot as a young student athlete. Like before, you didn't even know who I was, and I was like, Dr. Lemley said, you and Derwin Webb are the example of a student athlete. What a student athlete. I said, who's Derwin Webb? He plays on the basketball team, and so I look at the media guys. Oh, okay, that brother's. And then you say, hey, what's up? Is where you from? You say, I'm from NAF, and I was like, what's that? The Indianapolis. But it was cool, and I think I always have to thank you for just showing a good example, because you had a few examples in the dorm room on the football side. You had a few guys that your walk-ons and some guys that were in the speed school and some of those things, but like across the board, once the recruiting was over, they got on campus and then, okay, let me figure this thing out. Versus like I came there with a plan. I was like, I need 15 credits a semester. If I'm going to get redshirted, I'm going to be in grad school by my 5th year. Like I had a plan and I had to make some adjustments, but it's just, the whole don't plan to fail, fail to plan. I mean, whatever that is, but I'm glad that I was at that point where at least some level of maturity about how I dealt with school and academics and my future. I was glad that I had that approach.
Well, obviously you went to the NFL, but prior to getting to the NFL, you were an All-American for the football team, made the Senior Bowl. You did a lot of different things, and you wound up getting drafted. Tell me what the draft experience was like for you.
You know what? It actually sucked because every scout and told me like, had you left early, like you would have gotten drafted higher. And so coming back to school,
Now, don't get me wrong, third round's not bad.
bro, when you lose $2 million that you didn't earn and you didn't see, you'll never see again. I think that part of it, and I think I had the chip on my shoulders that, being an offensive lineman at Louisville is not like Michigan to Notre Dame or Wisconsin. And, there was that I got moved to O-line when I got it. I was a D lineman. Mm-hmm. And so this wave of the 90s, the athletic offensive lineman who had to match the athletic ability. I wasn't some, big fat guy with I was a lean, fit guy playing the position. And that was really Coach Stellenberger, from Miami. I mean, that was that model, we recruit for speed. And so that's what helped me. But I think the draft itself, deciding to stay and then being in grad school my senior year and doing stuff for the school. I was on the first student athlete advisory board. I felt like the school was using me for a lot of stuff and just be this template for recruits. And here's this guy with a 3.0 and he's an All-American. This is what we want. But like for me, it was just a lot. Like I almost needed an assistant like my last year. So by the time I got drafted, and I was glad that I got drafted by the Giants because being from DC, now I'm only 3.5 hours from home on the turnpike. Boom, hit 95. And so I was kind of getting back close to home, close to the environment. And then, but one thing I appreciated is because I did a lot at Louisville, I pledged, we threw parties, Miss Black and Gold pageant. I was able to socially adjust in college. And so you drop me in the middle of Manhattan at 22 years old, like I could adjust. I walk up to people, I could talk to people. My personality, the things that I built in college, I used when I got there because I was well adjusted socially. I think had I gone to a bigger institution, Oklahoma, those kind of schools, I wouldn't have pledged. I wouldn't have been allowed to. I would have kept in this bubble, similar to how the big schools do to athletes. And so I'm actually glad. Again, I appreciate the experience when you look back on it because I was able to do more and maximize myself. I don't recommend a lot of books, but this Malcolm Gladwell book, David and Goliath was one of my favorite ones. Came out a couple of years ago. There was one chapter where it talked about like the person that should have gone to Maryland was the name of the chapter. Mm-hmm. And so it talked about two different tracks, like the person went to medical school, I think at Dartmouth somewhere, kind of small fish in a big pond. And the person went to Maryland, like built their confidence. They went to med school, became a successful surgeon. Like it's all about like just building your confidence at that critical age so that you can go solve the world's problems, if you will.
And we've talked about that, being being at a small school, but being a big fish in that small school. So we've talked about that a little bit. Now, let's talk about your actual career. Now, natural thing is that people want to know who was your favorite quarterback you played with or what team you played. Just so we know, tell everyone the teams you actually played for in the NFL.
So got drafted in 96, 4 years with the Giants. So that was Dan Reeves 1 year, then Jim Fossil, then 2 years with the Browns, 2000, 2001, 1 year with Chris Palmer, then Butch Davis 1 year. And then I got left the Browns and got signed with the Buccaneers. So we go from a worst team in the league, and then I won a Super Bowl with Coach Gruden. So I was there for 2 years. Then I got traded to the Chargers as a part of the Eli Manning trade in 2004. Played my last 4 years with the Chargers. I was injured like my last year and a half or so. And then I retired 2008, moved back to New Jersey and started trying to solve the world's problems. But I think you learn a lot from every coach, a lot of coach transition and a lot of living in different cities. And I think, someone that's never left Louisville is no different than someone that's never left Brooklyn, New York, because you definitely have to have that experience and perspective of living in different places, and as it relates to your family, your children, having to make those adjustments too. But I think the the football part of this is I think obviously I would have to say my favorite quarterback would be Brad Johnson because we won a Super Bowl with the Buccaneers. But I love Drew Brees. I love Phil Rivers. I played with them as well, and they were great people and good competitors, fierce competitors. You know, your Hall of Fame type guys. You know, LaDaine Thompson's one of my better friends too. Mike Allstott. I mean, I played with a lot of good players, and so you don't. Again, that's something when you're in it, you're just trying to grind and make to the playoffs every year, and then decompress, go to next year, and then when it's all over, you're like, man, I should have had more fun, or I should have appreciated it more. I should have, but I think I maximized every day that I had in the league, and you and I met and for dinner a bunch of times in between that whole process, and so I think it was always good to make sure that. As my life was changing, I was still the same person, just dealing with different issues. And so you and I would talk about that a lot. You know, you would ask me, how am I dealing with this stuff? I'm like, oh, it's crazy. You know, you going to the front of the line, walking in the club and all, you know, and walking the restaurant, you know, cutting in front of 100 people with reservations. And I just never took any of that for granted. You know,
Right.
I was really appreciative that I was in that position to succeed.
Well, I'll tell you that the one good thing about our conversations, first of all, we could go for months without talking to each other and then pick up the phone and talk like we were just talking the day
Yeah.
before. So that's one good
That's what
thing that
best
we've
friends are all
kept.
about, man.
But I would tell you this the one thing that I think was good about our relationship, especially when you were in the league, was that we never really talked about you playing football. It was always talking about what's going on outside the football field. Now, I know that you were the player rep for 3 different teams. I want to talk to you about that, but I also know that you were different in that, for example, you took grad courses at Fairleigh Dickinson. So how was that? How was trying to get another degree while you were still playing? How was that perceived by your teammates? How did you have an opportunity to juggle that? You were building a family at the same time. So tell me about that.
Well, it's funny because I started out. I took I think 2 or 3 classes. I was in the Kent School of Social Work. There was no sports admin back then, obviously. So I wanted to study like public policy, you know, that administrative science, you know, municipal government like that. I thought I was either going to be a public servant, a politician, an AD, or something. I didn't know what I was going to do, but I loved the college schedule. So it was workout. 7:30 to noon, and then I had class at night, and I did that every off season for 4 years until I finished my master's. So it really gave me the schedule that I liked, that structure. You know, you can only go to South Beach or Atlanta or wherever, Cancun, however many times and get bored, and then you don't, you know, obviously it's expensive to fly and hang out but I didn't, you know, I hung out, I went out and stuff, I did some stuff, but like I love the structure. And just that ability to just complete a goal, you know. And I had no idea at the time that I was one of the only players within a 10-year span that was actually getting a master's degree like during his career. And I had no idea. So the New York Times did an article and it became a whole big thing. But, you know, back then it was never about the gram or the social media or anything like that. You just were doing it. You were just grinding. And so that I was appreciative. And again, I started that at Louisville in my 5th year. I was in grad school, and then I continued because the NFL had a program in what was called player development back then that you can use, find a local school that they were attached to, and you can get credits towards a degree. And it was really for people who left early for the draft and wanted to finish school because there were no online courses. So Fairleigh Dickinson, you know, they would accept their courses. They would work with the university, say, can we take these 2 because this guy needed 3 credits to graduate and he left early for the draft and still didn't graduate. So I used it for graduate school, and the 2 or 3 classes I took transferred. So I got accepted without taking the GRE. So because they just transferred the credits because I was already in school. So I never had to take a GMAT or GRE back then. The rules are different now. So I was appreciative of it. And I think joining the PA, being a player rep was almost literally symbiotic with me pledging. So I wanted the structure. I wanted to belong, do something else. I felt like I loved the meetings and, you know, Rob Rules of Order and how things were structured and planning things. And it's like, man, if I could dedicate myself and serve my locker room, learning about our benefits, what programs are available for us, what are available for people's wives, their kids, insurance laws were changing. Like that kind of kept me, the term is keep one foot in the parking lot in the NFL. So it allowed me to keep one foot in the parking lot of the real world. Not only in case football ends, but more so like, cause that's the real world. Like you don't want to dive so much into the sports world and then you get out of that And you're not, in the real world, you're not going to the gym every day until not 10:30. I mean, unless you own the gym, right? You're not just going to hang out in the sauna. I mean, people think an athlete's life is different than it really is. Some people do real estate, some people get into other things and different business ventures, but yeah. And so just in general, joining the players union, and actually you have to be voted. You have to run against other people and they vote for you and it's all right, this guy seems like a leader. And, but it's at first it's almost a job that no one wants because you're seen as that guy who's a player rep. But you've got to, and that role evolved into, how many two-a-days are you guys doing? And some of the just the real player issues. Deciding not to play when 9/11 happened in 2001. I mean, that was a players' union's discussion and decision rather. And so it was definitely an important role, but it actually gave me the appetite to say, like, I can solve bigger problems that relate to the life of the athlete. And I say the life of the athlete because the football part isn't guaranteed. The sports part can last 3 years, can last 4 years, can last 12. Praise God if you play that long as I did. Drew Brees just retired, played 18, 7. I mean, Phil Rivers played 17 years. I mean,
yeah.
that's rare. That's rare. But for the average guy that plays, even if it's one cup of coffee, you need to walk away with some resources and tools and benefits. And I was always happy that I was able to be that person in the locker room that can answer those questions and serve those guys in that capacity.
Because I know you so well, one of the things I kind of jokingly was, when I opened the show, I talked about all the different hats that you have, whether it's Hall of Famer, NFL player, executive in the NFL right now. I also know that one of the biggest hats that you wear is being a dad. And I love having conversations with you about your kids and stuff like that. And I know they're both football players. Talk a little bit about how you have kind of taught them to be a football player since you had actually went through the process yourself. Tell me about your kids a little bit.
Yeah, so my older son RJ he'll be a rising redshirt sophomore at Duke. He's a sophomore academically, redshirt freshman. And so good kid, hardworking, loves football, loves to compete. He's a defensive end, so he's like that defensive mindset. I think my younger son, who's an offensive lineman, so he got the curse of being like 200 pounds when he was like 11 or something like that. But I think he's now, as he's grown, it's good to see him just growing into his own. He's starting to get scholarship offers. He got a high SAT score, I think like a 1300 like last week. And so I was like, "Boy, you just ran a 4.340, man, in academics, man. That's a good job." So, but honestly, I think with any parent, you just want to be happy that at some point, like, all you can do is drive them to the bus stop on time and get them there. And at some point they got to buy it on their own, And so it was good to see them buying it on their own and then being confident in what they're doing. I think the criticism that they get from being the son of a former athlete from the time they were playing soccer at age 3, and they're supposed to be the best player on the team. And usually taller kids are a little clumsier or not as coordinated when they're younger because the little short fast kid is always really good, and then they just have to buy in and grow into their own. So I'm glad, and I would always say, look, you're going to peak at the right time. And then the offers and scholarships offers came like junior year. Unlike like sports like basketball, you're identifying those guys like 7th grade, 8th grade, who were like the top guys. So, but I think the one real bit of advice I gave, and I started with my older son. So he started his freshman year as 2015. So I said, let's look at rivals. Let's look at rivals 2005 for 10 years ago. Let's look at the rivals top 250. And so went to 2005, Googled it, looked it up. I said, now I want you to name how many people you recognize from that list. And this was like unscripted, didn't know what was going to happen. He went down, he was like, okay, it's like, Vince Young or somebody. I mean, he recognized 3 or 4 guys that were NFL guys. And this is the top 250 football players in the country from 10 years before. So it was like a exercise in where are they now? And then we were watching, we'd watch a college bowl game. We'd be Alabama against whoever, Tennessee, whoever. And I would just pause it and I was sorry, let this kid right here. We'd look up his name, we'd look at his stats. He was a 5-star, 4-star. And I said, this kid doesn't even play. And we would do it again and again and again. And I would say, so first of all, I say, schools only win on talent. I was like, but I'm pretty sure when these kids look back, they said, man, had I gone to a different school, I'd probably play more. Had I gone to Wake Forest or somewhere or whatever, I would have, or Louisville versus Alabama, like I probably would have played more. And I said, it's about finding the right place where you can succeed and fit, and not about chasing a national championship and not about all these other superficial things. And, oh, we're going to build $100 million facilities in the next 5 years. Look, I was promised a stadium in 91 from Schellenberger when I visited. That thing was done in 97 when I left. I came back and visited and saw the new stadium. So giving them my perspective without being preachy and just trying to guide them up to a place where they end up on their own recognizance. So I think that's been the biggest benefit. And now with my younger son, he gets it two ways, because he gets it from me and his brother. So he's like, look, he went in his inbox, his Twitter, he goes, these same coaches that were DMing me 3 years ago are now at all different schools. So he goes, be ready for that too. Coordinators want to be, assistants want to be coordinators, want to be head coaches, and they want to move and they want to feed their families. So they understood the business of football, business of recruiting, without me shoving it down their throat. So I think that's been the biggest benefit when you talk about having like an NFL dad or a dad that at least played college football.
Let me ask you this. What do you think is the biggest lesson you've learned from being an athlete?
From being an athlete?
Yeah.
I think I think unless you're in the military, and obviously you don't get paid as much in the military as you do, or the experiences are different. When you talk about structure and discipline and all the intrinsic values, all those things I learned in sports. And I think that the $1 million question is, can you use that? Can you get up every day when you have a big case or when you have a big presentation, a marketing presentation? Can you get up every day and approach life like you did when you had to play the Cowboys that week, or when you had to get ready for your bowl game? And I don't know that every athlete can, but I would hope that through that experience of school, academics, and sports, whether it's college or pro, you could learn that much about yourself, and you can just create that self-discipline that is going to drive you, in many cases, to be more successful than you were on the field or on the court. So that's what I appreciate the most.
Let me ask final question. Like we alluded to earlier, you wear many hats. You've worn many hats. You have had a great career on the football field. You've been very successful off of the football field. How do you want people to see you? I know that as a former football player, people will automatically think of you as just a football player. I know that through our conversations, I know that you've been involved in politics. You've been behind the camera. You've been on the stage, as a commentator, if you will. How do you want people to see you and some of the things that you bring to the table every day?
I think, in our business, perception is reality. So how people perceive you is 75% of what it is, and sometimes it's not. I just want to be remembered as someone who served and someone who maximized their ability and just took advantage of every opportunity. And I want to show that I led by example. You can be a good athlete, a good servant in the community. You could be a good person. One thing doesn't mean the other, and I think sometimes we've seen athletes get in trouble or negative things happen, and then, oh, there goes another one, So I think sometimes that chip on my shoulders I wore was that I always had to fight that perception of the athlete. And I think I'm always going to be 6'4", 280 or whatever, walking into a room with broad shoulders and, this big force. And sometimes you have to use that confidence in a meeting or a presentation, say, I have that perspective because I played and I know the business. And sometimes you've got to just be collaborative and listen, because people are a little intimidated. And that's a part of it that I recognize. And if there's a different level of emotional intelligence I think I've learned from being an athlete. When you talk about spring conditioning and all that stuff and just gutting yourself and pushing yourself to the limit, but then like not going off sides and just having that emotional intelligence to deal with everything. I learned a lot of that in college throughout my NFL career, and then it gives me the perspective to obviously teach my boys and a lot of things I'm involved in now.
Man, I just want to say thank you. not just necessarily thank you for coming on the show. Thank you for that. But man, you and I have talked about a lot through the years, from times we are at the University of Louisville to life changes, through different career patterns, things like that. I call you, ask you for advice. You do the same thing with me. I want to thank you for your friendship, man. We have been, and I don't say this lightly, we've been boys for years. So I just want to thank you, man, for being who you are, never changing, being Roman from 1991, 92, 93, somewhere around that time to 2021, man. You've never changed. You've always been the same. You've been consistent. You've been a true friend. And I just want to thank you, man, just for being who you are, man.
No, my pleasure, and I appreciate being on, and anytime you need me to do anything for you, I'm always there, man. And you're a dear person in my heart, man. And my life is better because of our friendship, honestly.
Man, I appreciate that. Well, thank you again for being a part of Matter of Perspective. And I will remind you and our listeners, it doesn't matter what you say, doesn't matter what I think. At the end of the day, it's all a matter of perspective. Thank you very much.